Hey everyone, this is the second episode of Wrapping Up Our History. I'm Frank. I'm studying at the University of Wollongong, and for one of my subjects we had to pick a media niche and conduct an ethnographic study, so that's what I'm doing. My topic is hip-hop as a social commentary for Indigenous Australians, and each episode I'll be taking a look at a few different songs, giving them a bit of a review and a discussion, hopefully to entice you to check the music out for yourself. So this week's episode is about Ziggy Ramo, who recently expanded upon his 2016 released Black Thoughts EP with his debut album of the same name.
Not to love myself, learn to love your own skin so sexy when you sink in, and there ain't no need to fit in, you're too pretty not to be.
Ziggy grew up in remote Arnhem Land and has lived in many different places across Australia. When Aboriginal first came together and were making waves with Reclaim Australia, Ziggy was right there too with a similar sort of socially charged message. The original EP was released after he was hospitalised, and by that stage he had, I think, almost of the album completed, but he didn't feel like Australia was ready to listen. Now, 4 years later, Ziggy Ramo's 16-track full-length album demands our attention. It's a powerful commentary that provides insight from a perspective that I feel like we've never heard before. It's an extremely personal and passionate tool of inciting conversation and hopefully change. So today I'm going to be looking at 3 songs from the album: Blackface, April 25th, and Stand for Something. It's incredibly difficult to try and focus on only 3 songs, but these were the standout tracks for me, and you'll see why shortly. So to get into it, track 2, Blackface.
Our black skin is not a costume for you to assume. Damn right I ain't got room to be amused. We ain't amused for your amusement. You were born as a heaven sent. Half of my kin wasn't born as human. So it's using you sister dealing with our feelings. It's appealing black skin.
One of the most valuable elements from Black Thoughts is its inclusion of relevant audio that pushed the narrative. Blackface starts with a news report about a mother who painted her kid's face black for Book Week as he dressed up as Nick Natatui. Ziggy uses audio to give other Indigenous people a voice on his record, like Stephen Oliver's I'm a Black Fella for the last interlude, but also he shines a torch to some of the blatant racism in Australia. There's one clip that he plays from Lang Hancock about essentially poisoning the waters of Indigenous communities. And these sort of audio bites definitely helped me match the aggression that Ziggy brought to the album as I'm listening. I think there's a big difference to JK's approach that we looked at last week compared to Ziggy. Ramo never tiptoes around the topic and directly confronts the people at fault. One of my favourite lines from Blackface is, "You paint your skin black but you don't wear it as your own. Australia, grow a fucking backbone." This album is a direct message to white Australia, and it's so necessary to listen, I feel like. I grew up in regional Australia, and there's certain microaggressions and institutional things that as a white Australian I never really noticed as racism, or if I did I would regrettably shrug it off and think, oh, that's just how things are. But growing up, moving around and just gaining life experience, you come to learn some people have just accepted how things are, but it's important, like Ramo says, you grow a backbone and you call out that kind of behaviour. And I think this album does a really good job of doing that, of calling it out and bringing light to certain things that white Australia wouldn't necessarily think of. The next track is April 25th. This one looks at the differences between white and black Anzacs and makes a strong contrast between the two.
Fuck those Anzacs, fuck those Anzacs, screaming, fuck those Anzacs, fuck those Anzacs. Now how fucked up is that? Yeah. Now how fucked up is that? We pick and choose our history, we rearrange the facts. We fought for a country that didn't.
April 25th discusses the remorse Australians demonstrate towards the Anzacs on April 25th and contrasts this to the neglecting attitude towards battles Australia has faced on its own ground. It's a jarring song and definitely initially made me feel uncomfortable, which is exactly the intention. Provocative lyrics like "fuck those Anzacs" is obviously not something that I agree with, but neither does Ziggy. He isn't trying to disrespect people who fought for our country. He's trying to get people to recognise that Indigenous people fought for their country too and were fighting well before international wars, but as a country they don't receive the same treatment, or we don't give them the same treatment. He explains this really well when he went on Q&A in August this year. He says, if in World War II we fought against genocide, yet we don't recognise the genocide in our country, that's a double standard. I completely agree, and I think that the censorship of this song is a controversial decision from the ABC. He was meant to perform this song on Q&A, but instead they didn't let him, and so instead he performed Stand for Something, which is the next song that we're going to take a look at.
You can feel my rage, yeah, I'm red hot. You either get my point or you get point blank shot, cause I ain't forgot. You see, black life's is nuisance, broke your own laws.
Again, the inclusion of other voices come into play here, and I just want to read the opening poem because it's a really, really moving statement, and I think it was found in a newsletter as an anonymous poem, so I don't think there's an author out there that has been credited, but it reads, "At the white man's school, what are our children taught? Are they told of the battles our people fought? Are they told how our people died? Are they told why our people cried? Australia's true history is never read, but the black man keeps it in his head." So Black Thoughts is probably an album that has made me self-reflect the most. I honestly couldn't tell you a single day where I was taught about the battles between Indigenous Australians and colonisers. It's just not part of education. I grew up in Bathurst, where a lot of people would have a school excursion to the goldfields and learn all about that, instead of just having a school excursion to literally the exact same place to learn about Walu, or Mount Panorama as many people know it. But that place has incredible significance to the Wiradjuri people and has a really beautiful story behind it. But yeah, instead we're not taught anything really about that, and I just think it's super shameful. Anyway, that's a sorry for that tangent. But yeah, I think the poem is really beautiful, and it kind of discusses that sort of generational trauma that Indigenous people feel. Stand for Something, yeah, it's one of my favourite tracks. And it also talks about the impact that generational trauma still has on us today. His performance on Stand for Something on Q&A was heavily criticised, as it was an extremely emotional and vulnerable moment for him. The general criticism sort of called it cringe, or piggybacking off an American movement, which of course is just an outrageous thing to say. And from listening to this album and seeing the response, I feel as though we still have an incredibly long way to go. But this album for me was more of an interactive experience. I found myself Googling certain things that he was referencing, and educating myself on it, which I think everyone should try to do. If you found it confronting and uncomfortable, good. Our history is uncomfortable to look back on, but it can no longer go ignored. And I think that the release of this album, I think it's fair to say that Ziggy feels the same way. He only released certain songs in 2016 and held back from releasing it all because he didn't feel as though Australia was ready to listen. Obviously, with the Black Lives Movement gaining more momentum this year, he wanted to drop it because there was as many eyes as there's ever been on these kind of topics. I don't think it's definitely not piggybacking off an American movement, because the whole Black Lives Matter is an international movement. It happens all over the world, and I think Australians are really blind to the fact and think that, oh yeah, it's just an American thing. But no, it happens here and it happens every day. Anyway, some other songs that I liked from Black Thoughts are Secondary and The Beginning of the End, which is the opening song. It's just some super golden era, Joey Badass inspired sort of rhyming schemes, topic matter, and overall tone color. Just like last week's episode, I've written a full review of this album for $80. So if you want to check that out, you're more than welcome to. It'll be linked below. But as always, check out the album for yourself. It's an extremely necessary listen for 2020 and is one of the most significant drops this year. I've also written a blog to be paired with this episode that goes into more detail about how the album was received and kind of taking a bit more of an academic look at it, more so for my uni assignment. But anyway, all the links for everything will be in the description below. And yeah, this has been wrapping up our history episode 2. Thanks for listening.